Hey guys, tonight we begin not with fairies or enchanted forests, but with something far more chaotic and surprisingly familiar. Falling in love on Wall Street in 1987. Because, believe it or not, navigating romance in a world of power suits, hostile takeovers, and corporate retreats was somehow even more complicated than realizing your feelings during a trustful exercise. From strategic marriages to love potions disguised as herbal tea, this tale proves that whether it's Shakespeare's Athens or Manhattan's glass towers, the human heart creates the same beautiful mess. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, where ancient magic meets the age of excess, and love still finds a way through the chaos. The summer of 1987 blazed hot over Manhattan, where glass towers reflected ambition like mirrors catching sunlight. In the executive suite of Theseus Industries, overlooking the concrete canyons of Wall Street, the air conditioning hummed while deals worth millions were brokered over imported coffee and crystal tumblers of scotch. Theodore Theseus stood at his corner office window, silk tie loosened, suspenders taut against his custom-tailored shirt. His Rolex caught the afternoon light as he surveyed his kingdom of steel and ambition. In 4 days, the merger would be complete. Hippolyta Enterprises, his fiercest competitor, would finally be absorbed into his empire, and Hippolyta herself, that magnificent warrior of the boardroom with her sharp shoulder pads and sharper business instincts, would become his wife in a strategic alliance that would dominate the market for decades to come. The intercom buzzed. His secretary's voice crackled through the speaker, announcing visitors. Theodore turned from the window, straightening his tie, as 3 young executives entered his domain. They moved with the nervous energy of those who hadn't yet learned to hide their desperation, their designer briefcases clutched like shields. Aegeus was old money, silver-haired and stern, a senior partner whose opinion still carried weight in the marble halls of power. Behind him walked his daughter Hermia, 24 years old, her dark power suit immaculate, her hair swept up in the architectural style favored by ambitious women who wanted to be taken seriously. Her eyes, though burned with something that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or profit margins. Theodore Aegeus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who remembered when handshakes meant something. I'm here about my daughter, about the arrangement. Theodore gestured to the leather chairs arranged around his massive desk, its surface gleaming mahogany unmarred except for a brass nameplate, and a single red telephone, the direct line that connected him to power brokers across the globe. Hermia remained standing, her pumps silent on the plush carpet. Father, I've told you, you'll do what's expected, Aegeus interrupted, his jaw set. Demetrius is the perfect match. His family's real estate holdings, combined with our investment portfolio, create synergies that I don't love him, Hermia said. And in those 4 words lay a rebellion that no business school had prepared her for. Theodore leaned back in his chair, leather creaking. He'd seen this before, young executives who thought passion mattered more than portfolio performance. Miss Aegeus, he said carefully, in our world, love is a luxury. Strategic partnerships are necessities. I love Lysander, Hermia declared, and spoke his name like a prayer, like a secret, like something worth more than all the stock options in Manhattan. The door opened again without announcement, and Demetrius strode in with the confidence of someone whose trust fund had trust funds. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his suit Worth Avenue tailored, his smile practiced in mirrors and boardrooms alike. Behind him, almost invisible in her cream-colored dress and anxious eyes, came Helena. Helena was tall, willowy, her blonde hair cascading over shoulders that seemed perpetually hunched, as if apologizing for taking up space. She worked in Demetrius's department, had loved him since their MBA orientation, had watched him pivot his affections to Hermia the moment Aegeus had dangled his daughter like bait before the corporate sharks. The team-building retreat, Demetrius announced, dropping a folder on Theodore's desk. All arrangements confirmed. Catskills, this weekend. The entire executive training program, plus the merger negotiation team. We leave Friday evening. Theodore nodded approvingly. Hippolyta's idea, actually some nonsense about corporate synergy and trust exercises before their companies merged. He'd agreed because refusing her anything had become impossible, though he'd never admit it aloud. Hermia will be there, Aegeus said, pointedly, as will Demetrius. Perhaps some time away from the city, from distractions, will help her see reason. Hermia's knuckles whitened around her briefcase handle. Helena watched Demetrius watching Hermia, a triangle of longing playing out in an office where such inefficient emotions had no place on any spreadsheet. There's also the matter of the presentation, Theodore continued, pulling out another file. The merger announcement requires entertainment for the investors. I'm told Bottom and his team from accounting are preparing something. A collective wince passed through the room. Bottom, the well-meaning but spectacularly untalented manager from the basement offices, had volunteered his people to create a theatrical presentation. Their enthusiasm vastly exceeded their competence. They're rehearsing in the woods, Demetrius offered, smirking. Something about getting in touch with their creative spirits, last I heard. They were doing some kind of tragedy about pyramid schemes and leveraged buyouts. Theodore dismissed them with a wave, his attention already returning to the contracts awaiting his signature. The young executives filed out, their personal dramas invisible to him beneath their professional veneer. But Hermia lingered at the door, turning back. For days until your wedding, she said quietly. For days until you merge with someone you barely know, for business. Is that really all we are? Mergers and acquisitions. Theodore met her gaze, and for a moment, something human flickered behind his executive mask. In 4 days, I gain an empire. What will you gain from following your heart? Hermia smiled, sad and knowing. I'll find out in the woods. That evening, Manhattan transformed into a glittering grid of ambition and neon. The streets below filled with yellow taxis honking their way through rivers of pedestrians, while above, in apartments where the rent cost more than most people's annual salaries, the young and ruthless prepared for another night of proving themselves worthy of the dream they'd been sold. Lysander's apartment in Soho was modest by Wall Street standards, a 4th-floor walk-up with exposed brick and windows that rattled when the subway passed beneath. He stood before his mirror, adjusting his tie, watching Hermia's reflection as she paced behind him, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. We could just go, Lysander said, turning to face her. His eyes held that idealistic fire that business schools tried to extinguish, but sometimes, in the strongest souls, only fanned into brighter flames. Tonight, before the retreat, I have that offer in Boston's smaller firm, less money, but it's real work. We could build something honest. Hermia stopped pacing, her silhouette framed by the window where the city sprawled behind her in a million electric dreams. My father would disown me, cut off my trust fund, blacklist us both from every firm that matters. Then we'll matter somewhere else, Lysander said, crossing to her, taking her hands. His touch was gentle despite the calluses from his second job. The one he worked weekends to pay off his business school loans, the debt that kept so many of them chained to careers they never wanted. Friday, the retreat. There's a commune near there, old friends from college. We slip away during the trust exercises, catch a bus to the Vermont border. By the time they realize we're gone, we'll be free. Through the thin walls. A neighbor's radio played the latest hit, some synthesizer heavy song about desire and freedom. Hermia leaned into Lysander's chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and sure beneath the armor of his Oxford shirt. Friday, she whispered. In the woods, across town, in a high-rise where doormen wore uniforms with more gold braid than naval officers. Helena sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by fashion magazines and self-help books with titles like Women Who Love Too Much and Smart Women, Foolish Choices. Her answering machine blinked, read 3 messages, none from Demetrius. She pressed play anyway, hoping. Her mother's voice, concerned and distant. A college friend, cheerful and oblivious. A telemarketer offering credit card consolidation. Helena reached for her phone, that cream-colored plastic lifeline sitting on the glass coffee table. She'd memorized Demetrius's number, could dial it in her sleep, had done so dozens of times before hanging up when he answered. Her finger hovered over the buttons. What would she say? That she'd noticed him watching Hermia with the same hungry intensity he'd once reserved for her. That she remembered when his ambition had included her in its trajectory. That she betrayed her MBA and her corner office, and her carefully constructed career for just one genuine moment of his attention. Instead, she dialed. He answered on the 3rd ring. Helena, he said, not quite concealing his annoyance. I'm reviewing the merger documents. Can this wait? The retreat, she said, quickly, before courage failed her. I heard Hermia mention she might not go. I thought you should know, in case you wanted to convince her. She trusts you. A pause. She could hear papers shuffling, the clink of ice in a glass he always drank while he worked, single malt scotch in crystal tumblers. Where would she go? Demetrius asked, his voice sharpening with the focus he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. Helena closed her eyes, hating herself, unable to stop. I overheard her and Lysander. Something about the woods near the retreat center. Friday night. Interesting, Demetrius said, and Helena could hear the smile in his voice, the predatory calculation. Very interesting. Thank you, Helena. This information is valuable. The line went dead. Helena sat holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone like it was music, like it was the sound of her own complicity, her own desperate hope that if she helped him win Hermia, he might remember she existed. Meanwhile, in the fluorescent-lit basement of Theseus Industries, where the accounting department resided in a maze of filing cabinets and outdated computers, Nicholas Bodham stood before his assembled crew with the passionate conviction of a man who demissed his true calling. Bodham was 43, balding, his tie perpetually askew. His suits purchased from department stores that offered layaway plans. He'd worked in accounting for 20 years, had a wife in Queens and 2 kids in community college, and harbored dreams of theatrical glory that manifested in community center productions, and now this opportunity to perform before the executives who usually pretended he didn't exist. Gentlemen, he announced to his team, Quince, the auditor, Snug, the tax specialist, Flute, the young intern, starveling from payroll, and Snout, who handled accounts receivable. We have been given a gift, a stage, an audience, a chance to show them we're more than numbers and calculators. Quince adjusted his thick glasses, squinting at the script he'd cobbled together from Greek mythology and supply room photocopies. I still think the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Pyramus and Thisbe might be too ambitious. We've only got 4 days. Nonsense, Bottom declared, his voice booming off concrete walls covered in tax code posters. I'll play Pyramus, the romantic lead. My death scene alone will reduce them to tears, and the rehearsals will hold them in the woods, where the atmosphere will inspire our artistic souls. His team exchanged uncertain glances, but said nothing. Bottom's enthusiasm was legendary, as was his complete lack of self-awareness, but he'd approved their vocation requests, and always remembered their birthdays, which made him better than most managers in this steel tower of casual cruelty. Outside the basement window, at street level, legs walked past in an endless parade of ambition. Expensive shoes, cheap shoes, sneakers, heels, all moving to the rhythm of a city that never stopped wanting more. Friday approached like a storm on the horizon, and in offices and apartments across Manhattan, people packed their bags for a weekend in the woods, not knowing that among the trees, something older than capitalism waited to remind them what chaos truly meant. Friday evening arrived with the weight of summer heat pressing down on the city like a humid promise. In the underground parking garage of Theseus Industries, executive vehicles gleamed under fluorescent lights, BMWs, Mercedes, one Porsche 911 in executive silver that belonged to Demetrius. The young professionals loaded designer luggage into trunks, their weekend casual attire still carefully calculated: Ralph Lauren polo shirts, pressed khakis, loafers without socks for the men, linen blazers and statement jewelry for the women. Theodore Theseus stood beside his black Lincoln Continental, briefcase in hand, as Hippolyta emerged from her own vehicle, a red Jaguar that announced her refusal to blend in. She wore white linen pants and a silk blouse the color of money. Her dark hair swept back, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. "Ready for trust falls and rope courses?" she asked, her voice carrying the sardonic edge that had made her legendary in hostile takeover negotiations. "Ready to merge," Theodore replied, and the word hung between them, meaning business and something more dangerous. The convoy departed as the sun descended behind the skyline, a caravan of luxury automobiles heading north on highways that transformed from concrete to asphalt, to finally, as night fell, narrow roads winding through forests that remembered older times. The Catskill Mountains rose around them like sleeping giants, their peaks dark against the sky still holding the last purple traces of daylight. The executives' car phones those brick-sized status symbols gradually lost signal as civilization receded in their rearview mirrors. Hermia rode in silence beside her father, watching the trees thicken outside her window. In the vehicle behind them, Lysander drove his used Honda Accord, its engine rattling but faithful, and behind him, Helena navigated her practical Toyota Camry, following Demetrius's Porsche taillights like a moth pursuing flame. 2 hours from Manhattan, the retreat center emerged from the forest like a fragment of a different decade, a different dream. The wooden sign, hand-painted with flowers and peace symbols, read, "Oberian Sanctuary, find your true self." The main lodge was a sprawling structure of timber and stone, built in the 1960s, when executives called it a hunting lodge. Now prayer flags hung from the eaves, wind chimes sang in the breeze, and the scent of incense drifted from open windows. On the wide porch, illuminated by strings of colored lights that predated the energy crisis, stood the proprietors. Oberon was tall, lean, weathered by decades of rejecting the corporate ladder his Ivy League parents had built for him. His hair, still thick at 50, was pulled into a silver ponytail. He wore faded jeans, a peasant shirt embroidered with symbols the executives didn't recognize, and Birkenstocks that had traversed continents. His eyes held the peculiar intensity of someone who de-dropped acid with Timothy Leary and never quite returned. Beside him stood Titania, regal despite her flowing batik dress and the crystals hanging at her throat. She'd been a Madison Avenue advertising executive once, before the awakening, before she'd walked away from a six-figure salary to, as she put it, remember how to breathe. Her bare feet were planted firmly on the worn wood planks, and her smile suggested she found the arriving executives both amusing and pitiable. "Welcome, corporate warriors," Oberon called out as car doors opened and confused young professionals emerged, looking around at the dream catchers and herb gardens like astronauts landing on an alien planet. "Welcome to the place where your true selves have been waiting." Theodore approached, hand extended for a professional shake. Oberon embraced him instead, ignoring the stiffness in Theodore's shoulders. "We're all family here, brother. For this weekend, titles and hierarchies dissolve. You're not CEOs or vice presidents. You're souls, seeking authenticity. Behind the lodge, deeper in the woods, where trails disappeared into shadows." Puck sat cross-legged on a boulder, cleaning his wireframe glasses. He was 26, but looked younger, having maintained the perpetual adolescence of those who refused to grow up on anyone's terms but their own. His army surplus jacket was covered in pins anti-nuclear symbols, concert badges, cryptic inside jokes. He'd been living at the sanctuary for 3 years, ever since he'd walked off the trading floor during the crash of '84. Simply laid down his buy orders and walked out, leaving behind suits and salary and sanity. Now he was Oberon's right hand, his chaos agent, his reminder that rules were suggestions and reality was negotiable. He watched the executives unload, watched Hermia's eyes scanning the forest edge, watched Lysander positioning himself strategically, watched Helena watching Demetrius, watching Hermia. "Oh, this will be fun," Puck murmured to himself, his smile feral and bright. Further into the woods, at a clearing where moonlight filtered through ancient oaks, Bottom and his accounting team had already arrived in Bottom's station wagon, plastered with bumper stickers about school fundraisers and Little League teams. They unloaded cardboard props, bedsheets meant to be togas, and a portable cassette player for dramatic music. "Here," Bottom announced, arms spread wide, "is where we shall create magic, where art shall triumph over spreadsheets, where the muses shall wear the mosquitoes are really bad," Flute interrupted, swatting at his neck. But Bottom was undeterred, already blocking out scenes, assigning entrances, his voice carrying through the trees to where the real magic waited, patient and ancient and deeply amused by these humans who thought they controlled anything at all. The stage was set, the players assembled, and the woods, those dark and dreaming woods, prepared to teach Wall Street what chaos truly meant. Night settled over the Catskills, like a velvet curtain, and with it came a transformation. The executives, exhausted from trust exercises involving blindfolds and elaborate metaphors about synergy, retreated to their assigned cabins' rustic structures, with names like Harmony and Awakening burned into wooden plaques. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and something herbal that drifted from the main lodge, where Titania prepared her famous consciousness-expanding tea. But deeper in the forest, where the manicured paths of the retreat center gave way to genuine wilderness, a different world stirred to life. Oberon stood in a grove illuminated by nothing but starlight and bioluminescent mushrooms that glowed faint green at the base of rotting logs. He was furious, his usual serenity cracked like a facade, revealing something older and more dangerous beneath the aging hippie exterior. Puck sat nearby on a fallen tree, rolling a joint with practiced fingers, watching his mentor pace. "She defends him," Oberon muttered, his voice tight. "Still defends him. After everything." The him in question was currently sleeping in cabin Savannah, young man named Ganesh, barely 22. who arrived at the sanctuary 3 months ago, fleeing a nervous breakdown brought on by 100-hour weeks at a consulting firm. He was beautiful in that fragile way of the newly broken, with dark eyes that had seen too much too soon and hands that still trembled when he held a coffee cup. Titania had taken him under her protection, had made him her special project, teaching him meditation and herbal remedies and how to weave baskets from willow branches. Oberon had demanded that the young man be sent away, back to his family in California. Titania had refused. She says he needs more time, Oberon continued, his pacing growing more agitated, more healing. But I know what I see. She looks at him the way she used to look at me, back when we first dropped out, first built this place, like he's potential, like he's hope. Puck lit the joint, inhaled, passed it to Oberon, who waved it away. So what's the play, man? You gonna let some corporate burnout kid mess with your situation? I'm going to remind her, Oberon said, his voice dropping to something darker. What happens when she forgets who really runs this sanctuary? When she forgets that I was the one who walked away first, who bought this land, who created this refuge from the machine? He turned to Puck, and in his eyes flickered something that had nothing to do with peace or love, or any of the values they preached to their corporate guests. You know the plants, the ones growing by the stream, with the purple flowers, the ones we tell people are poisonous. Puck's eyebrows rose. The Datora man, that's serious stuff. That's not your recreational consciousness expansion. That's full Envision Quest territory. People see things that aren't there, believe things that aren't true. Exactly, Oberon said, a smile playing at his lips. I want you to harvest some, extract the essence. By tomorrow night, when the moon is full, I'll have my opportunity. These corporate types and their ridiculous love triangles, they'll provide the perfect distraction. He gestured toward the retreat center, where in various cabins, young executives lay awake plotting their own dramas. The girl, Hermia, she plans to run away with that idealistic fool, Lysander. The other one, Demetrius, will chase them, and I've seen the way that tall blonde watches Himalena, they call her. She followed too, and you care about their soap opera because, Puck asked, genuinely curious, because Titania will be busy playing counselor, playing mediator, thinking she can fix their broken little hearts with trust circles and talking sticks. And while she's distracted, while she's proving to herself that she's still the nurturing mother goddess. Oberon's smile widened. You'll help me teach her a lesson about loyalty. Puck stood, stretching, his joints cracking. You want me to dose her? With Datora extract. Just enough, Oberon said. Just enough that when she wakes, the first thing she sees, whatever it is, she believes she's madly, desperately in love with it. Could be a tree, could be a raccoon, could be he laughed, the sound carrying through the dark woods like a warning, that pompous accountant, and his theatre troupe stumbling through their rehearsal. Imagine Titania, regal Titania, convinced she's desperately in love with some middle management fool in a cheap suit. That's cold, man, Puck said, but he was grinning. Seriously cold. I dig it. And these young lovers, Oberon continued, warming to his scheme, fix them too. The one who loves but isn't loved Helenados, the boy, Demetrius. Make him see her as she wishes to be seen. It's a kindness, really. We're helping. Sure, Puck agreed, his tone suggesting he knew better. Helping. That's what we're doing. They stood together in the darkness, teacher and student, conspirator and chaos agent, while above them the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and the forest breathed its humid summer breath. In the retreat center, executives dreamed of promotions and portfolios. In the cabins, young lovers planned escapes and pursuits. And in the woods between, Bottom's voice carried through the night as he rehearsed his death scene, dying elaborately and repeatedly to the polite applause of his exhausted team. "Tomorrow," Oberon whispered. "Tomorrow night, we remind them all that there are older powers than money, older chaos than markets. The woods remember what Wall Street forgot." Puck pulled a small vial from his jacket pocket he'd been carrying, Datura extract for weeks, just in case, because he'd learned to anticipate Oberon's moods. He held it up to the starlight, watching the amber liquid catch and hold the glow. "Lord, what fools these mortals be," Puck quoted, from some half-remembered literature class he'd abandoned along with everything else about his old life. "Indeed," Oberon agreed. "Indeed," and the forest, listening, seemed to laugh. Saturday morning broke humid and bright over the sanctuary. The executives emerged from their cabins in expensive activewear Adidas tracksuits, Nike headbands, leg warmers in neon colors that would look absurd in any boardroom, but here, away from the city, felt like costumes for playing at authenticity. Titania led the morning meditation on the main lawn, her voice honey smooth as she guided them through breathing exercises. Inhale the abundance of the universe. Exhale the toxic attachment to material success. The executives sat cross-legged on yoga mats, some genuinely attempting transcendence, others checking their watches and calculating how many billable hours they were losing. Theodore and Hippolyta sat side by side, not quite touching, their proximity its own negotiation. Across the circle, Hermia caught Lysander's eye, a brief glance that communicated volumes. Tonight, after dinner, when the group session on authentic leadership provided cover. But Helena saw that glance. Helena, who'd positioned herself with clear sight lines to both Hermia and Demetrius, who'd barely slept, who'd spent the night rehearsing speeches she'd never deliver. She watched Hermia's small nod, watched Lysander's subtle gesture toward the eastern trail, the one that led deeper into the state forest. After meditation came trust exercises. Oberon, playing the benevolent guru with practiced ease despite his inner turmoil, paired them off for an activity involving blindfolds and verbal guidance through obstacle courses. In business, you rely on sight, on data, on projections, he intoned. Here, you learn to trust the unseen. He paired Demetrius with an older executive, deliberately keeping him from Hermia. Puck watched from the lodge porch, smoking and observing, already planning his evening's mischief. The vial in his pocket felt heavy with possibility. Inside the lodge, Titania found young Ganesh in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the communal lunch. His hands were steadier now than when he'd arrived, no longer shaking with the aftershocks of his collapse. He hummed along to the radio some top 40 song about love and freedom that seemed to physically pain Puck whenever it played. "You're healing," Titania said softly, coming to stand beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, maternal and tender. "I can see it. The light returning to your eyes." Ganesh smiled, grateful and worshipful in the way of the rescued toward their rescuer. "You saved me. When I showed up here, I couldn't even say my own name without crying. Now I'm thinking about going back to school. Art therapy, maybe. Helping others the way you helped me." From the doorway, Oberon watched this interaction, his jaw tight, Titania's hand lingering on the young man's shoulder. The way she looked at him, like he was hope incarnate. Something in Oberon's chest twisted jealousy, yes, but also fear. Fear that she was moving beyond him, beyond their shared history, toward some gentler version of salvation that didn't include his particular brand of chaos. He turned away, finding Puck on the porch. "Tonight," he said simply. "After the evening session, she always walks the labyrinth at sunset." That's when you'll apply it. Applied topically or ingested? Puck asked, clinical despite the wildness of the plan. Mixed in her evening tea, just 3 drops, no more. Enough for suggestion, not overdose. We're teaching a lesson, not causing harm. Sure, man. A lesson. Puck's tone suggested he knew the difference between those things was smaller than Oberon wanted to admit. The day progressed with excruciating slowness for those with plans. Lunch was organic vegetables and tofu, which the executives pushed around their plates while making polite conversation. Afternoon brought a sweat lodge ceremony that left them dizzy and vulnerable, their defenses lowered by heat and discomfort. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that the city's smog never allowed, Bottom and his crew arrived at their woodland rehearsal space. They'd transformed the clearing into a makeshift theater, hanging bedsheet curtains between trees, arranging logs for seating, setting up the boom box on a stump. Places, everyone. Bottom called, consulting his crumpled script. We'll run through the full show. Flute, your Thisbe. Remember, high voice, feminine gestures. Mr. Bottom, I really think, Flute began. No thinking, acting, feeling. This is the death scene, it must be real. Bottom threw himself on the ground in demonstration, writhing dramatically. Oh, cruel fate. Oh, bitter end. My life is spent. His team watched with the weary patience of those who'd long since given up arguing. In the trees above, a fox observed with more interest than the performance deserved, and deeper in the woods, Puck took note of their location, already imagining Titania's face when she woke, dosed and suggestible, to find this ridiculous display. As twilight deepened into dusk, the retreat center's dinner bell rang. The executives gathered in the dining hall for a meal of grain salads and herbal tea. Hermia ate nothing, her stomach tight with anticipation. Lysander kept checking his watch, a Timex, not a Rolex, marking him as someone who hadn't yet sold all his idealism for status. Demetrius sat beside Aegeus, discussing market projections, but his eyes tracked Hermia's every movement. And Helena, seated alone at the end of the table, watched them all like someone reading a book she'd already memorized, knowing how the tragedy would unfold, but unable to look away. After dinner, as the group gathered for the evening session on releasing corporate toxicity through primal scream therapy, Hermia whispered to Lysander. He nodded. 5 minutes apart, they slipped away, melting into the darkness beyond the lodge lights. Helena saw them go. She counted to 60, then followed, her pale dress ghostly in the gathering night, and Demetrius, noticing Helena's departure, noticing everything because ambition had trained him to notice opportunity, made his excuses and pursued. In the kitchen, Titania prepared her evening ticamile and valerian root, a blend for peace and rest. Puck appeared beside her, as if materializing from shadow. Let me help with that, he said, taking the kettle. You've been working all day. Least I can do. She smiled at him, trusting, grateful. You're a good soul, Robin. Sure, he said, turning away so she couldn't see his face. That's me. Good. 3 drops fell into her cup, amber and potent. The first spell was cast. In the woods, 4 young executives stumbled through darkness, following trails that seemed to shift and multiply. And behind them, above them, around them, the forest awakened to the promise of chaos. The woods at night were nothing like the sanitized nature the executives had imagined. No streetlights penetrated this darkness. No friendly yellow cabs waited at corners that didn't exist. Here, the forest ruled with ancient authority, and the carefully constructed identities these young professionals wore like armor began to dissolve. Hermia moved quickly along the eastern trail. her pumps impractical for the terrain, forcing her to kick them off and continue barefoot. Behind her, Lysander carried a small duffel bag with essentials cash, his passport, a change of clothes. They'd agreed to meet at the old stone bridge, where the retreat property bordered the state forest, where freedom waited just beyond a line on a map. "This is insane," Hermia breathed, but she was laughing, exhilarated by the rebellion, by the feeling of choosing herself over expectation. "My father will lose his mind." "Your father," Lysander said, catching up to her, taking her hand, "has already lost everything that matters by trying to turn love into a ledger." They kissed there in the darkness, tasting like courage and recklessness. While behind them, perhaps 50 yards back, Helena crashed through the underbrush with all the grace of desperation. She'd lost the trail twice already, had torn her cream dress on branches that seemed deliberately hostile. But she pressed forward because ahead, somewhere, was Demetrius. And Demetrius moved through the forest like a predator. His expensive loafers ruined by mud, his polo shirt soaked with sweat, but his focus unwavering. He'd seen which direction Hermia went. He knew the old bridge they'd been shown it during the afternoon hike, told it was off limits, which made it exactly where someone running away would go. "Hermia," he called out, his voice carrying through the trees. "Hermia, wait." Ahead, Lysander and Hermia froze. "He followed us," Hermia whispered, panic edging into her voice. "Keep going," Lysander urged. "I'll talk to him. Slow him down. You get to the bridge. Wait for me there." She ran, disappearing into shadows, while Lysander turned to face his rival. They met in a small clearing where moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver shafts. Two young men, similar in their Brooks Brothers button-downs and business school pedigrees, divided by the oldest conflict in human history. "She doesn't want you," Lysander said simply. "What she wants is irrelevant," Demetrius replied, his voice cold. "What makes sense, what creates value, that's what matters. You're offering her poverty and obscurity. I'm offering partnership in an empire. You're offering a cage with good benefits, behind a massive oak." Helena had finally caught up, panting, listening. She pressed herself against the bark, watching Demetrius, memorizing the set of his jaw. The intensity in his eyes, even if that intensity was directed at another woman. In the clearing where Bottom's troop rehearsed, the accountant and his team were packing up for the night. Their cassette player blaring a dramatic orchestral piece Bottom insisted was motivational. "Same time tomorrow," Bottom called. "And flute, practice your feminine wiles. You're Thisbe, not a tax auditor." They departed, leaving their props scattered about cardboard swords, polyester togas, a paper mache wall that was meant to represent the barrier between doomed lovers. Minutes later, Titania emerged from a different trail, her movements unusually fluid, dreamlike. The Detera had taken effect, softening the edges of reality, making the world shimmer with suggestion. Everything seemed profound, meaningful, saturated with significance. She wandered into Bottom's rehearsal clearing, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name. The paper props glowed in the moonlight like sacred objects. She ran her fingers along the cardboard sword, feeling the corrugation like cosmic truth. "So beautiful," she whispered. "Art, pure art." Puck watched from the shadows, grinning, waiting. Phase 1 complete. Now for the lovers. He moved through the forest like smoke, finding Lysander and Demetrius still arguing, their voices rising, their professional veneers cracking to reveal something raw underneath. "She'll have freedom," Lysander shot back. From behind the oak, Helena couldn't contain herself any longer. She stepped forward, her dress torn, leaves in her hair, looking like some wood nymph conjured by desperation. "Demetrius," she said softly. He spun, startled, then angry. "Helena, what are you doing here?" "Following you. I'll always follow you." The words came out broken, pathetic, true. "Go back," he said dismissively, already turning away. Puck had heard enough. He pulled the vial from his pocket, unstapped it silently. Demetrius passed close to a low-hanging branch where Puck crouched invisible in shadow. One drop on the collar of his polo shirt, absorbed through skin, subtle and devastating. The effect would take minutes. Puck settled in to watch, delighted. The forest held its breath. For lovers, scattered through the darkness, one fairy queen, entranced and wandering, and chaos, that ancient force, preparing its masterpiece. Demetrius felt it first as warmth spreading from his collar, then as a shift in perception, as if someone had adjusted the contrast on reality itself. Colors intensified, sounds sharpened, and Helena, standing before him in her torn cream dress, with leaves tangled in her blonde hair, transformed from an annoyance into something luminous. He blinked, confused by the sudden rush of feeling. Helena was backlit by moonlight, her face anxious and hopeful, and somehow impossibly she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. How had he not noticed? How had he wasted months chasing Hermia when this goddess had been following him, loving him, offering herself like a gift he'd been too blind to accept? Helena, he breathed, and her name on his lips felt like prayer, like revelation. She stepped back, uncertain. "What? You're—" He moved toward her, his eyes wide with chemical wonder. "You're extraordinary. How did I not see it? Your dedication, your intelligence, the way you've always understood me." "Stop it," Helena said, her voice breaking. "This isn't funny, Demetrius. I know I'm pathetic, following you out here, but you don't have to mock me." "Mock you?" He reached for her hand, held it like something precious. "I'm trying to apologize for being blind, for wasting time on someone who doesn't want me when you've been here, constant as the stars, loving me with the kind of loyalty I didn't deserve." Lysander watched this transformation with confusion bordering on disgust. "What are you playing at, Demetrius? 5 minutes ago you were hunting Hermia like she was a quarterly bonus." But Demetrius only had eyes for Helena. "Hermia, that's over, finished." "I was confused, distracted by her father's business proposition. But this," he gestured between himself and Helena, "this is real." Helena pulled her hand away, tears streaming down her face. "You're cruel, both of you. Is this a game? Did you plan this together, to humiliate me?" "Helena, I swear," Demetrius began. "Go find Hermia," Helena choked out. "Marry her, build your empire. Just leave me alone." She ran, crashing back through the underbrush, and Demetrius, entranced and bewildered, followed immediately, calling her name like a man who'd found religion. Lysander stood alone in the clearing, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Had Demetrius actually given up? Or was this some elaborate corporate strategy, some way to manipulate the situation? He shook his head, deciding it didn't matter. Hermia was waiting at the bridge. They needed to move, but as he turned to go, Puck stepped from the shadows directly into his path. "Whoa there, lover boy," Puck said, his grin feral in the moonlight. "You're going the wrong way." "Who are you?" Lysander demanded. "Just a helpful local." "The bridge. That trail's washed out. Dangerous." "You want the western route?" Puck pointed deeper into the woods, away from where Hermia waited. "I know the way," Lysander said, trying to step around him, but Puck was faster, blocking him with the casual ease of someone who knew these woods like his own mind. "Trust me, man, you don't." "But hey, If you want to break your neck in a ravine, be my guest. Lysander hesitated, and in that moment of doubt, Puck reached out as if to pat his shoulder in reassurance, his fingers brushing Lysander's neck, leaving the faintest trace of amber liquid against his skin. Can't miss it. There's even a shortcut. He melted back into darkness, leaving Lysander disoriented and suddenly uncertain. The Western Trail. Had he miscalculated? The forest at night all looked the same, trees and shadows and the distant sound of running water that could be the stream or could be the river or could be his imagination. He chose a path, hoping it was right, while the datura seeped into his bloodstream, preparing to rewrite his reality. Meanwhile, in Bottom's rehearsal clearing, Titania had discovered the costumes. The polyester togas seemed to glow with inner light in her altered state. She draped one around her shoulders like royal robes, feeling the synthetic fabric as if it were spun silk. The papier-mâché wall, that pathetic prop meant to represent the barrier in Pyramus and Thisbe's love story, looked to her like ancient architecture, like something profound. The artists who created this, she whispered to herself, they understand truth. They've transcended the material world. She heard crashing in the underbrush bottom. Returning, having forgotten his script, he stumbled into the clearing, not seeing her at first, muttering his lines to himself. Oh, cruel fate that keeps us apart. Oh, wall that stands between our hearts. He gesticulated dramatically, his tie still askew, his balding head shining with sweat in the humid night. Titania saw him and gasped. In her drugged perception, Bottom seemed transformed, not a middle-aged accountant in a cheap suit, but an artist, a creator, a man who'd chosen beauty over profit. His passion for his terrible play looked like courage. His complete lack of self-awareness looked like confidence. His polyester tie seemed like a statement of defiant individuality. You, she breathed, stepping into the moonlight. Botter jumped, startled. Mummies, Titania, I didn't know anyone was where. Just rehearsing for the presentation, the merger celebration. We didn't mean to, your art, she interrupted, moving closer. Your dedication to the craft. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. Bottom's eyes widened behind his smudged glasses. What? The world told you to calculate, to audit, to reduce life to numbers. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Oberon would be pleased, even if the lesson was perhaps crueler than intended. Bottom stood frozen, confused, terrified, and flattered in equal measure, as this beautiful, mysterious woman looked at him like he was everything she'd been seeking. The night was young. The chaos was just beginning. Hermia waited at the stone bridge, her bare feet cold against the moss-covered rocks. The bridge was old, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, its stones held together by faith and mortar that crumbled at the edges. Below, water rushed black and silver in the moonlight, heading somewhere, anywhere but here. She checked her watcher, delicate Cartier, a gift from her father for making junior partner, 20 minutes past their meeting time. Where was Lysander? Fear crept into her chest like frost. Had Demetrius caught him, hurt him, or worse, had Lysander reconsidered, decided that love without a trust fund wasn't worth the sacrifice? She sat on the stone ledge, hugging herself against the night chill, and waited. In the woods, Lysander stumbled along what he hoped was the western trail, but the detour was taking hold now, making the trees seem taller, making shadows move with intention, making everything shimmer with uncertain meaning. His thoughts grew cloudy, malleable, open to suggestion. He heard someone crashing through the brush ahead, that same desperate, graceless movement that could only be Helena. She emerged onto his path, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her dress torn beyond repair, looking like someone who'd survived a shipwreck only to find herself still drowning. "Helena," Lysander said, and even saying her name felt strange, as if he was noticing her for the first time. The moonlight caught her hair, turned it in a gold, her tears made her eyes luminous. When had Helena become so captivating? "Not you two," Helena said bitterly. "Is everyone in these woods losing their minds? Your dedication." Lysander heard himself saying, the words coming from somewhere beyond his control. "The way you love so completely, so honestly. Why didn't I see it before?" Helena laughed, a broken sound. "Oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I deserve. First, Demetrius decides to torture me with fake affection. Now you. Did Hermia put you up to this? Is this her revenge for me telling Demetrius about your plan?" Hermia? The name felt distant, like someone he'd known in another life. But Helena, standing before him, tear-stained and furious, seemed urgently real. "Helena, I don't know what's happening, but I know I've been a fool. Hermia's father was right about one thing: sometimes we chase the wrong dreams." He moved toward her, reaching for her hand. She slapped it away. "Stop it. I won't be your joke, your game, your butt." Her voice broke because part of her, that desperate part that had followed Demetrius into these woods, wanted to believe that somehow, impossibly, someone actually saw her as worth loving. Lysander persisted, following as she backed away. "I'm not joking. I've never been more serious. You're everything: loyal, intelligent, brave enough to chase what you want, even when it humiliates you. That's not weakness, Helena. That's strength." And somewhere in the forest, Hermia finally abandoned the bridge and went searching, calling Lysander's name into the indifferent darkness. At the retreat center, Oberon stood on the lodge porch, surveying his domain. The executives were all accounted for, most sleeping in their cabins. A few gathered in the common room playing board games and pretending they were undesperately missing their car phones and pagers. Theodore and Hippolyta sat on the far end of the porch in Adirondack chairs, sharing a bottle of wine they'd smuggled from the city. The corporate armor had softened slightly. They spoke in low voices about the merger, yes, but also about other things, where they'd grown up, what they'd wanted to be before business school had seemed inevitable. "I wanted to teach," Hippolyta admitted. "Literature, poetry, impractical things. I wanted to build," Theodore said. "Not financial structures, actual buildings, architecture." They looked at each other, seeing past the power suits to the people underneath, and something shifted between them, not the strategic alliance they'd planned, but something more dangerous, something real. Oberon barely noticed them. He was searching the grounds for Titania, growing concerned. She always returned from her evening walk by now. He moved toward the trails, calling her name softly, not wanting to alarm the guests. Puck intercepted him near the trailhead, grinning. "Looking for your lady. Where is she? Fulfilling your wishes, boss." "She's down in the rehearsal clearing, absolutely entranced. You should see it. Hits poetry." Oberon followed Puck through the darkened woods until they could see the clearing. There, illuminated by moonlight and the otherworldly glow of the paper props, Titania had draped herself across a fallen log, like Cleopatra on her barge. Bottom sat beside her, awkward and amazed, as she fed him trail mix from her pocket like it was ambrosia, gazing at him with drugged adoration. "What have you done?" Oberon whispered, torn between horror and fascination. "Exactly what you asked," Puck replied. She awoke. She saw him. She fell hard. Bottom was speaking, his voice carrying through the night. "Ms. Titania, really, I should get back. My wife expects me to call from the payphone. Check in about the kids' homework situation. Your wife," Titania said dreamily, "doesn't understand your artistic soul like I do. Stay. Tell me about your vision for Pyramus. Tell me everything." And Bottom, despite himself, despite his confusion and his loyalty and his certainty that this was wrong, began to talk, because someone was finally, genuinely interested in his passion. And that attention was intoxicating even without chemical assistance. Oberon watched his victory tasting unexpectedly bitter. He'd wanted to humble her, yes, but seeing her like this reduced, vulnerable, making a fool of herself, felt less like triumph and more like cruelty. "The lovers," Oberon said, turning away. "You fixed the situation with the young executives." Puck's grin faltered slightly. Yeah, totally. All good. Which one did you dose? The one chasing Hermia? The one in the polo shirt?" Puck offered, suddenly uncertain. "They're all in polo shirts, you idiot. Tell me you got the right one. Tell me you dosed Demetrius." Puck's silence was answer enough. "Who did you dose?" Oberon demanded. "There may have been 2 polo shirts, and I may have gotten enthusiastic in the woods." For voices now called into the darkness. Hermia searching for Lysander, Demetrius searching for Helena, and Lysander and Helena dosed and devoted, declaring love to the one person who couldn't believe them. The chaos Oberon had planned had exceeded his specifications, and even he was beginning to wonder if he could control what he'd unleashed. The 4 lovers converged in a clearing that seemed to exist specifically for confrontations, as if the forest itself had arranged the staging. Hermia arrived first, breathless and frightened, her designer blouse torn, her bare feet bleeding from stones and thorns. She saw Lysander and relief flooded through her end, till she saw how he was looking at Helena. "Lysander," Hermia called, running to him. He turned, and his face showed not love but confusion, as if she were a stranger claiming familiarity. "Hermia, I was looking for me, apparently," Helena said bitterly, stepping into the clearing from the opposite side. "Except I don't want to be found. Not by you, not by Demetrius, not by any of you, Helena." Demetrius emerged from the trees, his expensive clothes ruined, his hair wild, his eyes fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "Please, stop running. Let me explain. Oh God, both of you." Hermia looked between the 2 men, understanding dawning with sick certainty. "This is her doing. She's turned you against me somehow." "No one's turned anyone," Lysander said, but he moved closer to Helena as he spoke, as if pulled by invisible threads. "I've just realized where my affections truly lie. Helena's devotion, her constancy, her manipulation." Hermia spat. "I trusted you, Helena. I told you our plans, and you betrayed me. And now you're trying to steal Lysander too." "Steal him?" Helena's voice rose to a shriek. "You think I want this? You think I orchestrated some scheme where both men I've been compared to and found wanting suddenly decide to torture me with false love?" "It's not false," Demetrius insisted, reaching for Helena's hand. She jerked away. "I love her," Lysander declared, and the words hung in the air like evidence. Hermia felt the world tilting beneath her. She'd given up everything: her father's approval, her career trajectory, her security for Lysander's love. And now he stood in the moonlight declaring devotion to someone else. His eyes unfocused, his voice strange, but his words devastatingly clear. "You're lying," Hermia said, her voice small. "This morning you loved me. This morning we planned a life together." "This morning I was blind," Lysander replied, the debtor speaking through him. "I see clearly now. Then you see nothing." Hermia launched herself at Helena, years of competitive corporate culture channeling into pure rage. Helena, taller and stronger, caught her wrists, and they struggled in the moonlight, while the two men moved to intervene. "Stop this." Demetrius pulled Hermia away from Helena, his protectiveness enraging her further. "Don't touch me. You wanted me hours ago, chased me through these woods like I was a commodity to acquire, and now you're defending her." "I was wrong," Demetrius said simply. "About everything." Hermia looked at the three of them, her best friend, her lover, her pursuer, all aligned against her, all treating her like the villain in a story she couldn't understand. The loneliness was absolute. "I hate you," she whispered to Helena. "I hate all of you." She ran, plunging back into the forest, and this time no one followed. The three remaining stood in awkward silence, the absurdity of the situation finally penetrating even their altered states. "This is insane," Helena said quietly. "All of this. We're professionals, we're educated, rational people, and we're standing in the woods in the middle of the night, declaring love like teenagers while someone's life falls apart." "Helena," both men said simultaneously, then glared at each other. "No," Helena said firmly. "Both of you, just no. I'm going back to the retreat center. In the morning, we're all going to pretend this never happened. We're going to finish this nightmare weekend, return to Manhattan, and never speak of this again." She walked away with as much dignity as her torn dress allowed. The two men looked at each other, rivals united by their chemical devotion to the same woman, and the hatred between them crystallized into something dangerous. "This isn't over," Demetrius said. "Finally," Lysander replied. "Something we agree on." They circled each other in the clearing, civilized men reduced to territorial animals, while overhead the stars wheeled indifferent and the forest, having engineered this chaos, settled in to watch what humans would do when their carefully constructed identities dissolved. Somewhere in the darkness, Hermia collapsed against a tree, alone and abandoned, crying for the life she'd lost and the fool she'd been to believe love mattered more than the cold equations of power. And in the rehearsal clearing, Titania stroked Bottom's thinning hair and told him he was magnificent, while Oberon watched from the shadows and wondered if some lessons cost more than the learning was worth. Dawn approached with reluctant light, the sky transitioning from black to deep blue to that uncertain grey that exists between night and morning. The forest, which had seemed infinite and magical in darkness, revealed itself as finite, just trees and clearings and trails that led somewhere comprehensible after all. Oberon had not slept. He sat on the porch of the lodge, watching the eastern sky, feeling the weight of what he'd done settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. Behind him, through the screen door, he could hear the executives beginning to stir coffee, percolating, showers running, the tentative sounds of people preparing to pretend normalcy. Puck found him there, looking uncharacteristically subdued. The chaos that had seemed so entertaining at midnight felt hollow in the pre-dawn light. "The lovers are still out there," Puck reported quietly. The two guys almost came to blows around 3 a.m. Helena's been sitting by the stream for hours, talking to herself. "And the small one, Hermia, I lost track of her." "Find her," Oberon said. "Make sure she's safe, and then what? We just let this play out. Let them destroy each other over some chemicals and your ego." Oberon's head snapped up. Watch yourself. No, man, I'm done watching. This was supposed to be funny, a lesson. But that girl out there thinks her whole life just imploded. Those guys are ready to actually hurt each other. And Titania, Puck gestured toward the woods. She's planning to leave you for a guy whose idea of art is a cardboard sword. Oberon stood, his ponytail disheveled, his tie-dye shirt wrinkled from the long night. I know, all right, I miscalculated. You think, the antidote, the mint extract we use for clarity ceremonies, it counteracts the deterror, doesn't it? Puck nodded slowly. Takes about 20 minutes to metabolize. They'll wake up confused, probably with gaps in their memory. Like coming down from a really bad trip. Get it? All of it. We're going to fix this before the executives have to present themselves at breakfast, before anyone realizes what happened. And Titania, Oberon's jaw tightened. Her too, though she know what I did. She always knows. In the rehearsal clearing, as pale light filtered through the canopy, Bottom sat on a log experiencing the most surreal hours of his entire 43 years. Titania lay with her head in his lap, finally sleeping, her breathing deep and peaceful. His legs had gone numb an hour ago, but he was too terrified to move, to break whatever spell had transformed this elegant, mysterious woman into someone who looked at him like he held answers to questions she'd been asking her whole life. His wife, Carol, would never believe this. Hell, he didn't believe it, and he was living it. He'd spent the night talking about theatre, yes, but also about his kids, his mortgage, his dreams of doing something meaningful before he retired. Part of him, the practical, Queensborn part, that understood the world through tax codes and subway schedules, knew this wasn't real, knew something was wrong with her, drugs or a breakdown, or some rich person eccentricity he couldn't comprehend. But another part, the part that rehearsed death scenes in the woods and believed community theatre mattered, wanted to believe that maybe just once someone saw the person he wished he was instead of the person he'd settled for being. Titania stirred, murmuring in her sleep, "My artist, my beautiful artist." Bottom gently stroked her hair, feeling protective and confused and guilty all at once. In the forest, Lysander and Demetrius had reached a détente, born of pure exhaustion. They sat on opposite sides of a clearing, too tired to fight, watching the sky lighten and trying to understand what had possessed them in the night. "I feel strange," Lysander admitted. "Like I'm waking up from a dream where everything made sense. But now nothing does," Demetrius finished. He pressed his palms against his eyes. "What did we say to them? To Helena? To Hermia? I don't. I remember declaring love, being certain, but it's fading, like trying to hold water." They looked at each other, two ambitious young men who nearly destroyed each other over feelings that were already evaporating in the morning light. "We're going to have to face them," Demetrius said. "At breakfast. Explain somehow. Explain that we lost our minds. That something in the woods made us." Lysander stopped. "Do you think they drugged us?" "Oberon and his people," the T.I. Demetrius said slowly. "That herbal tea at dinner?" They stood simultaneously, anger replacing confusion, purpose replacing chaos. They had a target now, someone to blame, and that felt better than admitting they'd simply broken under pressure and isolation. Near the stream, Helena watched the water flow over smooth stones, understanding for the first time why people joined monasteries or moved to cabins in Alaska or otherwise removed themselves from the world. The humiliation of last night being pursued by two men who clearly weren't in their right minds. being blamed by Hermia, being the center of a drama she'd never asked for had clarified something. She was done. Done with Demetrius. Done with making herself small to fit into someone else's narrative. Done with the corporate ladder and the power suits and the pretending that any of it made her happy in the morning light. That decision felt like the only real thing she'd taken from this nightmare. And somewhere in the woods, curled against the roots of an ancient oak, Hermia slept the sleep of pure emotional exhaustion, unaware that above her, Puck crouched on a branch, holding a vial of mint extract and waiting for Oberon's signal to begin the undoing. Puck moved through the forest like a ghost, the vial of mint extract in one hand, a small spray bottle in the other, the kind used for misting houseplants, repurposed now for redemption. He found Hermia first, still asleep against the oak, her face streaked with dried tears, her expensive blouse ruined beyond any dry cleaner's salvation. He misted her face. Gently 3 sprays, the mint sharp and clarifying in the humid morning air. She stirred, coughed, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then memory came flooding back and her face crumpled. "Hey," Puck said softly, crouching beside her. "Easy. It's going to be okay." "Nothing's okay," Hermia said, her voice raw. Lysander got dosed. You all did. With something that made you believe things that aren't true, feel things that aren't real." He showed her the vial. "This is the antidote. Lysander and Demetrius are getting it now. In 20 minutes, they'll remember loving you again." Hermia stared at him. "You drugged us. This was all. What? Some kind of experiment?" "Not my idea," Puck said quickly. "I just execute orders. Badly, it turns out." He offered her his hand. "Come on, let S get you cleaned up before everyone wakes up and this becomes the kind of corporate scandal that follows you forever." She let him pull her to her feet, still processing. "So last night, none of it was real. Lysander didn't mean any of it. He meant it while he was under. But that wasn't really him meaning it. It was the drug talking." Puck started walking, and Hermia followed, numb. "The question is, what was real before we messed with it?" By the stream, Oberon found Lysander and Demetrius preparing to storm the lodge and demand answers. He raised his hands in surrender before they could speak. I know what happened, and I'm here to fix it." He produced 2 small cups of liquid, the mint extract mixed with spring water. "Drink this, both of you. It'll clear your heads, help you remember what you really feel. You admit it," Demetrius said, furious. "You drugged corporate executives. Do you have any idea the lawsuits saved the threats?" Oberon said wearily. "You want to sue me? Fine, after you get your minds back. Drink." They drank, suspicious but desperate. And Oberon watched as the clarity began returning to their painful process, like watching someone surface from deep water, gasping. Lysander spoke first. "Hermia, oh God, Hermia, what did I say to her?" "You told her you loved Helena instead," Oberon said bluntly. "You told her she meant nothing. You made her believe her whole world had ended." Lysander sat down hard on a rock, his head in his hands. "I have to find her. I have to. She knows," Oberon interrupted. "My associate is explaining. She knows it wasn't you. Whether she forgives you, that's between you and her." Demetrius was experiencing his own reckoning. Memories of pursuing Helena, of declaring desperate love, of meaning every word in that moment. But underneath, older memories surfacing Helena before Hermia, before Aegeus had offered his daughter like a business merger. Helena at orientation, brilliant and funny, before he'd calculated that Hermia's connections were more valuable. I loved Helena once, Demetrius said quietly. Before it was strategic to love Hermia, I'd forgotten, or convinced myself it didn't matter. And now, Oberon asked, now I do unknow what S real and what S the drug and what S just guilt. That's called being human, Oberon said. Welcome back to it. At the rehearsal clearing, Oberon found the scene he'd orchestrated his lesson in jealousy made flesh. Titania still dozed with her head in Bottom's lap, while Bottoms sat frozen, clearly having lost all circulation in his legs, but too polite or too terrified to disturb her. Miss Titania, Bottom whispered when he saw Oberon. I think she's sick. She's been saying things that don't make sense, looking at me like I don't know what. But it's not right. She needs help. Oberon felt something crack in his chest. This middle-aged accountant, uncomfortable and confused, had spent the night protecting Titania's dignity even as she embarrassed herself. He'd been kind when he could have taken advantage. He'd been decent when the situation invited anything but. You're a good man, Oberon said, meaning it. Better than me. He approached with the antidote, kneeling beside Titania. I'm sorry, he whispered, then misted her face with the mint extract. I'm so sorry. She woke slowly, blinking in the morning light, seeing Bottom first and smiling with drugged affection, then seeing Oberon and memory clicking into place. The smile died. Understanding dawned, cold and complete. You didn't, she breathed. I did. She sat up, her movements careful, controlled. Bottom tried to stand, his legs buckling, having to catch himself on a tree. I'll just go. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Titania, and I hope you feel better. He limped away as fast as his numb legs would carry him, leaving them alone. You drugged me, Titania said, her voice dangerously quiet. Because of Ganesh. Because you were jealous of a broken boy I was trying to heal. I wanted you to understand how it felt, Oberon said. To watch you care about someone else more than you. She stood, brushing leaves from her batik dress. Oberon, I've cared about you for 15 years. I walked away from everything to build this place with you, but caring for you doesn't mean I stop caring for others. It doesn't mean I become your possession. I know that now. Do you? Titania looked at him, really looked, seeing past the ponytail and the tie-dye to the insecure man underneath. Because what I see is someone who talks about freedom and consciousness and transcendence, but who's just as controlling as any CEO in a corner office. You just use crystals instead of contracts. The words hit like physical blows. Oberon had no defense because she was right, completely, devastatingly right. What do we do now? He asked quietly. Now. Titania smiled sadly. Now we get through this weekend without destroying anyone else. Then we figure out if this partnership still works. But Oberon, it only works if we're actually partners. Not owner and owned. Not controller and controlled. She walked away, heading back toward the lodge, leaving him alone in the clearing with the cardboard props and the paper-mache wall and the evidence of his cruelty. By 8 a.m., the retreat center had assumed an appearance of normalcy that belied the night's chaos. Executives emerged from cabins in fresh polo shirts and pressed shorts, heading toward the dining hall where coffee and whole-grain muffins awaited. They stretched, complained about the primitive accommodations, checked their watches, and calculated how many more hours until they could return to civilization. Theodore and Hippolyta sat at breakfast together, their conversation flowing with an ease that surprised them both. The strategic merger was still happening, contracts were contracts, but something else was developing alongside it. Something neither had accounted for in their projections. When we get back, Theodore said, pouring her coffee. Maybe we could have dinner. Not a business dinner, just dinner. Hippolyta smiled. Are you asking me on a date? After we're already engaged? Seems like we did things backward, he admitted. Might as well continue the pattern. At a corner table, the four young lovers sat in awkward proximity, nursing coffee and avoiding eye contact. They'd found each other on the trail back, had walked in silence, and now occupied the same space without knowing how to navigate it. Hermia spoke first, her voice careful. So we all got drugged by hippies? With some kind of hallucinogen? Apparently, Lysander agreed. He wanted to reach for her hand, but wasn't sure he'd earned the right. Hermia, what I said last night wasn't you, I know. She looked at him finally. But here's what I'm wondering, was yesterday morning you, when we planned to run away, to choose love over logic? Or was that just another kind of intoxication? The question hung there, unanswerable. Lysander had no words. Demetrius cleared his throat. Helena, I owe you an apology. Several apologies. For last night, but also for before. For treating you like you were invisible once someone more advantageous came along. Helena looked at him steadily. I appreciate that. But Demetrius, I also owe myself an apology. For making myself so small, so desperate for your attention that I lost track of who I was. She stood, her torn dress replaced with borrowed clothes from Titania. I'm withdrawing from the executive program. I'm going to take some time, figure out what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. Helena, Demetrius started. I hope you figure it out too, she said gently. What you actually feel versus what makes strategic sense. Because last night, even drugged, you seemed happier pursuing me than you ever did pursuing Hermia. She left them there, walking out into the morning sunshine, and Hermia watched her go with something like envy. She's brave, Hermia said quietly. So are you, Lysander replied. The bravest person I know, which is why I need to ask, do you still want to run? Knowing it might all fall apart, knowing we might fail. Hermia considered. Her father, the trust fund, the career path she'd been groomed for since birth. Then Lysander, with his used Honda and his idealism and his genuine belief that meaning mattered more than money. Ask me again after this weekend, she said. When we're back in the real world and I can think clearly, when I know if I'm choosing you or just choosing rebellion. Fair enough, Lysander said, and under the table, hidden from view, their hands found each other and held on. Bottom returned to his accounting team in the rehearsal clearing, limping slightly, his expression dazed. They'd been searching for him since dawn, worried and confused. Boss, Quince called out. Where were you? We thought maybe you'd gotten lost, or I had the strangest night, Bottom said slowly. I think I dreamed that Ms. Titania fell in love with me, that she called me her artist king and listened to me talk about Pyramus for hours like it was Shakespeare himself speaking. His team exchanged glances. Flute spoke carefully. That's quite a dream, Mr. Bottom, indeed. Bottom shook his head, as if clearing cobwebs. Well, back to reality. We have a performance tonight. The merger celebration. Let's make it perfect. They rehearsed with renewed focus, Bottom throwing himself into the work with the fervor of someone trying to convince himself that ordinary life still made sense. In the lodge, Oberon found Titania preparing for the day's activities, final trust exercise before the evening's celebration. They worked in professional silence, to people who'd shared everything now, uncertain if they shared anything at all. I'm releasing Ganesh, Oberon said finally. Not because you asked, but because it was never my place to decide who stays or goes. This is our sanctuary, not my kingdom. Titania nodded, acknowledging the gesture without quite accepting it as enough. I don't know how to not be controlling, Oberon continued. I dropped out of the system, built this place, told myself I was free, but I just recreated the same hierarchies in tie-dye. Then learn, Titania said simply. Or don't. But decide who you want to be, Oberon, because I can't decide for you. The day progressed toward evening. The executives participated in their final exercises, learned nothing profound, and counted the hours until departure. The lovers maintained their fragile détente, unsure of their futures but at least certain of their present confusion, and as the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the stage was set for Bottom's performance, that ridiculous play about doomed lovers, performed by accountants, which would somehow become the mirror in which they all saw themselves reflected. Evening arrived with the weight of finality. This was the last night, the merger celebration, the performance that would cap off a weekend everyone would remember differently. The retreat center's main lawn had been transformed, with string lights casting warm glows against the gathering darkness. Folding chairs arranged in semicircular rows facing a makeshift stage constructed from plywood and optimism. The executives arrived in their version of formal wilderness attire, khakis pressed with travel irons, blazers that had survived the weekend relatively unscathed, cologne and perfume applied to mask 2 days of limited showering facilities. They carried glasses of wine and craft beer that Oberon had permitted for this final evening, a concession to corporate comfort. Theodore stood at the front with Hippolyta beside him, their shoulders touching in a way that suggested their merger had expanded beyond merely business. He clinked his glass with a borrowed spoon, calling for attention. Colleagues, partners, friends, he began, his voice carrying the authority that had built empires. This weekend we came to the woods, seeking synergy, seeking to build trust before our companies unite. What we found, he paused, glancing at Hippolyta, was perhaps more than we expected. We found that beneath our titles and our strategies, we all navigating the same fundamental questions about what we want versus what we think we should want. Scattered applause. The executives shifted in their seats. Some moved, others just ready for this whole experience to end. And now, Theodore continued, we have entertainment. Our accounting department, led by Nicholas Bottom, has prepared a theatrical presentation. I'm told it's a tragedy. Let's show them our appreciation. More applause as Bottom and his crew took the stage, their nervousness palpable. They wore their makeshift costumes, the polyester togas, the cardboard crowns, the props that looked exactly like what they were. Office supplies repurposed into art. Bottom stood center stage, his balding head shining under the string lights, his glasses slightly crooked, his conviction absolute. Noble executives, Bottom announced, his voice wavering only slightly. We present for your consideration the most lamentable comedy and most cruel death of Pyramus and Thisbe, a tale of love divided by circumstance, of passion destroyed by misunderstanding, of the tragedy that befalls us when we cannot see past the walls we build. In the front row, Titania watched with complicated feelings, seeing Bottom in the evening light, earnest and vulnerable and completely sincere in his terrible art. She felt a strange affection, not the drugged obsession of last night, but genuine warmth for someone who dared to be ridiculous in pursuit of meaning. The play began. Quince, as the narrator, read from his script with the monotone delivery of someone reading quarterly reports. Flute entered as Thisbe, his falsetto voice cracking with nervousness, his toga slipping off one shoulder. The executives began to snicker, but not entirely unkindly. There was something endearing about the sheer commitment to this doomed production. Then Snout entered, wearing a sign that read WALL in magic marker, standing rigid between the lovers. Oh wall, Bottom cried, as Pyramus, throwing himself at Snout with dramatic flair. Oh, sweet and lovely wall, show me a crack, that I might see my love. Snout extended his fingers in a small opening. Bottom peered through, his performance so earnest that the laughter in the audience began to shift, still amused, but also charmed. I see her, Bottom declared. Thisbe, my love, my life, speak through this terrible barrier. Flute approached from the other side, pressing his face close to Snout's fingers. Pyramus, is that you? Oh, this wall is so inconvenient. The audience was laughing now, but Bottom and his crew pressed on, undeterred. They were terrible objectively, undeniably terrible, but they were also committed, vulnerable, willing to be ridiculous for the sake of something they believed in. Hermia, sitting beside Lysander, watched the wall between the lovers and felt the metaphor settle in her chest. How many walls had she built herself? Her father's expectations, corporate culture, the fear of being seen as weak or impractical, and Lysander beside her, who'd been willing to tear those walls down. Consequences be damned. She reached for his hand. He took it, surprised, hopeful. On stage, the tragedy progressed. Starveling entered as Moonshine, wearing a white sheet and holding a flashlight, explaining in painful detail that he represented the moon. Snug followed as the Lion, his movements so gentle and apologetic that he paused mid-scene to assure the audience he was only pretending to be dangerous. I'm not really a lion, Snug announced, breaking character completely. I'm just Snug from accounts receivable. Please don't be frightened. The laughter was warmer now, appreciative. These men weren't performers, they were accountants, playing dress-up, but their sincerity transformed inadequacy into something almost touching. Demetrius sat alone, several rows back, watching the doomed lovers on stage pursue each other through misunderstanding and manipulation. He thought about Helena, who'd left immediately after breakfast, catching a ride back to the city with a departing staff member. He thought about how he'd pursued Hermia because it made strategic sense, how he'd abandoned Helena because she didn't advance his position, how he'd spent years optimizing his life like a portfolio and forgotten to ask if any of it made him happy. On stage, Pyramus discovered Thisbe's torn scarf and assumed her dead. Bottom launched into his death scene with the full commitment of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. He staggered, he clutched his chest, he delivered a monologue about love and loss that went on so long several executives checked their watches. Oh Thisbe, Bottom cried, falling to his knees. Oh my love, I cannot live in a world without you. He stabbed himself with the cardboard sword, which bent on impact. Undeterred, he mimed the wound, collapsing in stages, dying elaborately and at length. The audience was rapt now, caught between amusement and genuine engagement. This ridiculous play, performed by amateurs with props from a supply closet, was somehow speaking to something real. The absurdity of their own dramas, the walls they built, the misunderstandings they manufactured, the ways they all killed parts of themselves for careers that would forget them the moment they stopped producing. Bottom lay sprawled on the stage, his cardboard sword beside him, his chest still rising and falling with breath, despite Pyramus being definitively dead. The string lights above cast shadows that made the scene almost beautiful. This middle-aged accountant in a polyester toga, having given everything to a performance nobody had asked for. Then Flute entered as Thisbe, discovering his lover's body, and something shifted in the performance. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the emotional weight of the weekend, or simply that Flute had stopped caring about looking foolish and decided to commit completely. His falsetto dropped away, and when he spoke, his voice carried genuine grief. Pyramus. No, no, This cannot be. I came as quickly as I could. The lion frightened me. I ran, but I returned for you. I always return for you. He picked up the cardboard sword, and the audience stopped laughing. The absurdity remained the cheap costume, the office supply props, the boombox playing dramatic music from a cassette, but underneath, something true had emerged. "What is love?" Flute said. His words Quince's script, but his emotion entirely his own, if not the courage to be vulnerable. "What is devotion if not returning? Always returning, even when the world tells us we're fools." He raised the sword. "And so I follow you. Through walls, past lions, beyond all reason, I follow." He stabbed himself, the sword bending, exactly as it had, for Bottomand collapsed across his lover's body. The two accountants lay tangled in polyester, ridiculous and profound, while the audience sat in complete silence. Then Theodore began to clap. Slow, deliberate applause that acknowledged he'd witnessed something unexpected. Hippolyta joined him, then others, until the entire audience was standing, applauding these brave, foolish men who'd dared to care about something besides quarterly returns. Bottom and his crew stood, bewildered by the response, taking awkward bows. Bottom's glasses had fallen askew during his death scene. Flute's toga had completely slipped off one shoulder. Snout still wore his wall sign. They looked like exactly what they were, ordinary people who'd reached for something extraordinary and, through sheer commitment, had almost touched it. That was, Theodore struggled for words, genuinely moving. "Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for reminding us that passion matters more than polish." The crew retreated, still confused by their success, while the audience mingled on the lawn, the evening's entertainment bleeding into the weekend's final social hour. The string lights glowed against the deepening night, and the forest beyond the lawn seemed to lean in, listening. Lysander and Hermia stood apart from the crowd, near the edge where manicured grass met wild woods. The play had crystallized something for both of them, the absurdity and necessity of choosing love over logic. "I still want to run," Hermia said quietly. "But watching those men up there, being brave enough to look foolish, it reminded me that safety is just another kind of death." "Your father will disown you," Lysander said, making sure she understood the cost. "I know, and I'll survive. People do." She turned to face him fully. "I'm not running away anymore. I'm running toward you, toward whatever we build together." "Is that still what you want?" "More than anything," Lysander said, and kissed her there at the boundary between civilization and wilderness, between who they'd been expected to be and who they might become. Across the lawn, Theodore and Hippolyta watched this tender scene unfold. "Young love," Theodore commented. "Think they'll make it?" "Does anyone?" Hippolyta replied. "But at least they're trying. That's more than most people manage." She looked at him. This man she'd been scheduled to marry for strategic purposes, and felt the unexpected weight of actual affection. "When we get back to the city, when the merger is complete, and we rerunning this empire together, let's not forget what we learned here." "Which lesson?" "That hippies drug people. That accountants have hidden depths. That walls are just walls," Hippolyta said. "We build them because we're scared, but love requires we tear them down, even when it's impractical. Even when it doesn't maximize shareholder value." Theodore smiled, and in that smile was the shadow of the person he'd been before business school, before the corner office, before he'd learned that vulnerability was weakness. "Deal, though let's keep the tearing down of walls metaphorical. I've got a lot invested in real estate, near the lodge." Oberon and Titania stood in the kitchen doorway, watching their guests. They're weekend warriors who'd come seeking team building and found chaos instead. Do you think they learned anything? Titania asked. I think we all learned something, Oberon replied. Though whether the lessons we learned were the ones we needed, he shrugged. I'm sorry, truly sorry. For using them, for using you, for thinking I could engineer consciousness like it's a quarterly projection. Titania was quiet for a long moment. I'm not ready to forgive you. Not completely, but I appreciate the apology. What happens now? With us? Now we clean up the mess we made. We make sure those kids get back to the city safely. We check on Helena. Make sure she's alright. Titania turned to him. And then we figure out if this partnership can be rebuilt on actual equality instead of just rhetoric about it. And Ganesh is leaving anyway. He got into that art therapy program in California. He's healed enough to move forward. She smiled sadly, which was always the point. To help people heal and let them go. Something you might consider learning. Oberon nodded, accepting the rebuke because he'd earned it. In the parking area behind the lodge, Bottom loaded props into his station wagon, the cardboard sword, the polyester togas, the paper-mache wall that had represented all barriers between all lovers. His team had already departed, exhausted and strangely exhilarated. Mr. Bottom, he turned to find Titania approaching, no longer drugged, no longer looking at him like he held secrets to the universe. Just a woman being kind to someone who'd been accidentally kind to her. I wanted to thank you, she said, for last night, for being gentle when you could have been otherwise. Bottom blushed, his face red even in the parking lot's dim light. Ms. Titania, I'm not sure what happened, but I know you weren't yourself. Seemed like the decent thing, just listening. Decency is rarer than it should be, Titania said. She reached up and straightened his tie still askew, always askew. Your play tonight was beautiful. It was terrible, Bottom corrected, smiling. It was both, Titania agreed. The best things usually are. Sunday morning arrived with the clarity that only distance can provide. The executives packed their designer luggage, loaded their luxury vehicles, and prepared to return to the city that never stopped, demanding more. The retreat center looked smaller in daylight. Less magical, just a lodge with prayer flags and a parking lot full of BMWs. Hermia stood beside Lysander's Honda Accord, her single suitcase at her feet. She'd called her father from the payphone, the conversation lasting less than 2 minutes. He'd given her a choice: return home, accept Demetrius, continue the plan, or be cut off completely. She'd chosen herself. No trust fund, she said to Lysander, trying the words out, testing their weight. No family connections. Just my MBA and whatever I can build on my own. Just us, Lysander corrected, loading her suitcase into his trunk beside his own battered luggage. That Boston firm still has the offer open. Smaller salary, but real work. Helping companies restructure ethically instead of just maximizing profit. Sounds perfect, Hermia said, and meant it. They pulled out of the parking lot, heading north instead of south, toward a future they'd write themselves. Demetrius sat alone in his Porsche, engine running, not yet moving. Through the windshield he could see Theodore and Hippolyta saying goodbye to Oberon and Titania, all warmth and genuine gratitude despite the chaos. He thought about the presentation he was supposed to give tomorrow. Market projections, synergy models, the language of acquisition and growth. He thought about Helena, probably already back at her apartment, probably already drafting her resignation letter. He turned off the engine, got out, found the payphone. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cautious. Hello, it's me, Demetrius. Don't hang up. Silence. Then, I'm listening. I don't know what's real, he said. the words rushing out. I do and know if what I felt in the woods was the drug or something true trying to surface. But I know that for months I chose strategy over honesty. I chose Hermia because it made sense on paper, and I abandoned you because you didn't advance my position. And that makes me exactly the kind of person I used to despise. Demetrius, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to see me again. I'm just saying I'm sorry, and I'm going to try to be better. To want things because I actually want them, not because they look good on my resume. Helena was quiet for a long time. That's a start, she finally said. Maybe in a few months, when you've figured out who you are without the corporate armor, call me again. We'll see. I will, Demetrius promised. I absolutely will. He hung up, got back in his Porsche, and drove toward the city feeling lighter than he had in years. Theodore and Hippolyta's convoy departed last, their vehicles flanked by security and assistants, returning to the empire they were building together. But in Theodore's Lincoln, as Manhattan's skyline emerged on the horizon like a promise or a threat, they held hands in the back seat to people who'd merged companies and accidentally merged hearts. The wedding's still on, Hippolyta asked. Only if you want it to be real, Theodore replied. Not strategy, not shareholders, just us. Just us, Hippolyta agreed and kissed him there in traffic on the Cross Bronx Expressway, while their driver pretended not to notice. At the retreat center, Oberon and Titania walked the grounds, picking up forgotten water bottles and name tags, returning the space to its natural state. I'm keeping the sanctuary, Oberon said, but restructuring everything. Collective management. No more guru on the mountain making unilateral decisions. That's good, Titania said. That's growth, and us, she considered, looking at this man she'd built a life with, who'd betrayed her trust, but was genuinely trying to change. We'll see, one day at a time. No guarantees. Fair enough, Oberon said, and it was. In Queens, Botten returned to his modest house, where his wife Carol waited with coffee and questions. He told her about the performance, about the standing ovation, about feeling for one night like art mattered more than tax codes. I'm proud of you, Carol said simply, and that was worth more than any applause. Monday morning, the executives returned to their towers of steel and glass, to their computer terminals with green phosphor screens, to their car phones and their ambitions, but something had shifted. Not everything the system was too big, too entrenched for one weekend to revolutionize. But small things changed. Hermia's empty desk in her father's firm became a reminder that some people choose meaning over money. Helena's resignation inspired 3 other junior executives to ask themselves what they actually wanted. Demetrius started mentoring younger employees with honesty instead of strategic platitudes. Theodore and Hippolyta built their empire, but built in time for each other, too. And sometimes, in quiet moments between meetings and mergers, they remember that weekend in the woods when hippies drugged them and accountants performed tragedy and love revealed itself as both absurd and necessary, both ridiculous and real. The forest, that ancient witness, remembered it, had seen conquistadors and colonists, had watched the civilian conservation corps build bridges and the counterculture build communes. It had seen everything human beings thought was permanent dissolve into memory, and it would see the towers of Manhattan crumble eventually too. But love foolish, impractical, wall-breaking, love that the forest recognized as eternal, not because it lasted, but because people kept choosing it anyway, kept reaching for each other across every barrier, kept dying dramatically on stages for the slim chance of connection. Summer faded into fall. The leaves turned gold and crimson. And in offices and apartments across the city, people who'd spent a weekend in the woods carried forward the strange lesson that chaos had taught them. That the walls between what we are and what we might become are thinner than we think, and sometimes breaking through requires nothing more than the courage to look foolish, the strength to be vulnerable, and the faith that on the other side of reason, love is waiting. The end.